Your worship, Councillor Grew has joined. You're only missing Councillor Gumichel.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Knopper.
Your worship, it is now 6 o'clock. If you would like to proceed, you may begin.
Thank you. I will now call to order a council meeting, which is tonight for the purpose of public consultation on the Market Wharf design on Wednesday, January 20th, 2021 at 6 p.m. Recording of attendance, I note that all members of council are in attendance with the exception of Councillor Gumichel, and who I hope will be able to join us in progress. I'll look quickly to the approval of the agenda, please, with only one item on it.
I so move.
Thank you, Councillor Bishop, and a seconder.
I'll second, your worship.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. And all in favor of approving the agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. The only one item we have on the agenda this evening is under introduction, consideration, and passing of bylaws and motions. It is PED 201201, the Market Wharf Design Concepts. The town of St. Andrews will be presenting information on several Market Wharf design concepts, costing, and life cycles. The public is encouraged to participate and provide feedback. I will first turn it over to Mr. Knopper to explain in more detail how this will unfold tonight for both council and those that are participating. Then we will turn it over to Chris Spear, our Chief Administrative Officer and Treasurer, who will make a presentation for council's benefit and the public's benefit. And then council will have an opportunity to comment on it. And then we will take questions and comments from the public through Mr. Knopper. So Mr. Knopper, could you take over from here, please?
Thank you, your worship. Thank you, public and council, for attending this evening. The process that we'll be taking, CAO Spear will have a presentation on the wharf and the design concepts for it. After that, council will have an opportunity to discuss these options before we open it to the floor to the public. We will go to Zoom first, and each individual person will ask to keep your camera off and muted throughout the presentation process and council discussion. I will select each individual Zoom. You will have up to, depending on the number, we're estimating between 3 and 5 minutes to provide both question and comment to council. After that, we will ask that you finish your comment and we'll move on to the next person. We'll do that through Zoom. After that, I will go to my emails. So anybody who is on Facebook right now that will have a question can email me to pnopper@townofstandrews.ca. Your question or comment will be provided to council at that time. There will also be another opportunity for the public to provide consultation on February 17th. We will be doing it through Zoom, and if possible with the levels of preferably yellow at that time, we will go to an open session, but for now it will be through electronic means. At this time, I will, and as well, we will not be taking any comments or questions from the Facebook site. So any comments and questions must come through either email, written correspondence afterwards to the town hall, or via Zoom. And at this point, I will pass it to CAO Chris Spear to conduct the presentation.
So I just want to confirm everyone, or at least someone can see my slideshow on the screen.
Yes, Chris.
See a nod? Yes, no?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Your worship, council, and those that are in attendance, thank you so much for this opportunity to have a look at, again, at this Market Wharf refurbishment. Really, the way we came up to this point is that probably with 5 or 6 years ago, we ran into some issues on the wharf where it was determined that some of the original wooden structure on the approach had rotted through and wasn't safe for heavier traffic. And so we actually had to close off the wharf to heavy trucks, and then we ended up doing an emergency repair at the council authorized at the time over a 4 or 5 week period to continue on. In the day, we'd put in an application to Infrastructure Canada in regards to being able to do a generally large refurbishment of the wharf so it can continue for many decades to come. And we just found out in the last 6 or 7 months that has been approved to be looked at, sort of going to the next step, that the province has picked it out as a potential project that it's submitting to the federal government for further debate. The total value of the project is around 5 million for everything done, of which we're looking for about 70% to be financed by the other levels of government. Get these slides mixed up. So tonight we're going to look at 3 options that came across our boards over the last few months. One is to replace the current wooden structure, and so that we pull out what's the approach, roughly the first 70 to 100 meters of the wharf, and replace it with more wood, and we'll get into that in a few moments. The next, and the hotly contested one, I guess, is the infill or the armor stone version, which will have gotten some different views and concept drawings up tonight just to have a look, or renderings. And then the final option that we're going to look at is a concrete structure that has been brought forward that can also be looked at as more traditional in its look, but has certainly a superior quality as far as its longevity. So we're going to jump right into the similar structure. And so this is a picture of our wharf taken today. As you can see, that the structure essentially is 10 by 10 posts on the ground that have these ballast boxes that you see, about 50-meter intervals, that have large rocks and things that basically stabilize the wharf. So if you just had the wooden piles that you see on the outside that hold it, then likely the wharf would suffer a little bit from wave action. So back in the day, they designed these rock cribs that were put in to try to stabilize it against the tidal action, as far as I can tell. Now, to do that work just on the wooden structure, you're talking about $3.4 million upfront cost. But because that it deteriorates much faster than other options, the 60-year life cycle cost of that is actually $6 million, which is a significant price tag. So essentially, we'd have to replace that wharf once over the repairs and maintenance that we'll be doing over that 60-year life cycle. Now, the pros that a lot of people like is it does maintain the original look of the wharf. So the town that's based highly on heritage and our history, people think that's a really important aspect, and staff understand that. And of course, it'll blend in with the remaining structure much better. But again, we're just talking about the approach, so the wooden structure that makes up about the first third of the wharf. The problem with that structure is it's harder to accommodate for sea level rise. That the price we have right now, the 3.4 million, doesn't accommodate for that. They are going to have to do a little more studying to figure out how to make that work. And as mentioned earlier, the wood deteriorates much quicker. That sections of that wharf, as we have had to do in the last 10 years, would likely have to be replaced after 25 or 30 years until the whole use of the wharf was deemed unsafe. And this won't mean much right now, but we'll get into it in a little bit, that there is going to be smaller width of the wharf compared to the infill structure. Now, the next one we're going to look at is the armor stone infill to replace the approach. So again, the first third would be armor stone out to the remaining concrete and steel structure that we know today. And a lot of this was already presented back on December the 14th. So we did make some changes as requested by council, primarily to take this building. Can you guys see my mouse?
You're not showing.
Yep. Okay. Well, in the middle of the picture, you can see what we'll call the Island Quest buildings at the corner there of the wharf on the upper side by the Anchor Restaurant building, and you can see that it's to enhance the view, and that it thereby, if you're coming down King, you get a better view of that. Coming from the other direction, you can see that from a bird level's view, if you're standing about 20 meters above the shack, you'd see that the wharf is, again, tremendously wider. As you can see, and we'll show pictures later, where the people are walking is the width of the current wharf. And so essentially the inside lines on on the left side, and then the inside of the walkway in the other is the width of the current wharf, which is the outside of the current wharf. And so you got that tremendously amount more width that can accommodate so much more potentially going down the road. Here's another view from a little bit further out. Again, low tide. This is again, access to the beach can be worked into it. So can come down in front of the King Street side where the boat ramp is and be able to get into the beach and to explore. Councillor Grew had asked about staircase on the other side. That's not recommended because I think, as Councillor Gubershall had said, for talking to staff, it's really mucky on the other side of the wharf and people have lost boots and stuff all over there. So even though it's relatively close, completely different type of topography. And so it probably not be safe to send people over there. As you can see, this is the view from the corner of King Street and Water Street with that building removed. And so it allows a much broader view of the water, which is important to this council, the street ends we call it, to be able to provide the panoramic view for tourists, for visitors, and for people just approaching the wharf from Water Street for the first time or 1,000th time. It provides a much wider open concept view. Of course, there are Navy Islands on the other side of that, not the Grand Ocean, but certainly it provides a great environment to be able to look at. This view is essentially, if you're standing on a ladder in the middle of Water Street, almost on the top of the Red Herring building, you can see how that looks like from bird's eye view from that. It should be noted how much larger the square is too, which is not only beneficial to farmers markets, will allow for a little bit more parking for such things as Canada Day and then any other events like Paddle Fest that are hosted in Market Square. It's certainly going to provide a significant amount more space for them to work with and to host events. If you're standing in the wharf, this rendering shows what the rock would look like, you know, from a normal person's point of view. As you can see, although it's visible, it's not taking away from the viewscape very much, especially that we've got going along, both along Market Square and along the wharf, those posts that maintain the nautical theme, along with ropes that also maintains a safety aspect for anyone going along the wharf. Now, the change in the width as discussed earlier is the current deck width is 7.2 meters, and the infill option with the prices we show is the only one that allows for a wider wharf. With the infill, it increases the width to 22 meters or 72 feet. So you're getting almost 3 times the width, which is great for safety. It's also good for some of the options we've talked about by increasing more seating along the wharf. Or we even discussed having ticket booths or some type of retail as you first go along the wharf. And really, this is the only option that's going to make that viable with the current budget that we have to operate with. Excuse this, but is this really showing what the width of the wharf is compared to the current wharf? So that's Terry Acton on the left there and me on the right. But as you can see, this current wharf at the top is going to be going from the front of the parking lanes there on the right over, and this picture will show better. Whoop. Didn't bring that picture, I guess. Oh, there it is. Sorry, skipped it. So the same thing is that it goes about the halfway where the current Island Quest building is. So it's a significant amount of width that's being added. It's got pros and cons. Like I said, from a practical use, it's going to give the ability to do a lot more on the wharf. Negative use may not be as visually appealing. And again, it's been raised and staff are going to have to ask the question eventually about what will this rock interface do to the tidal flow in that part of the bay. From a cost perspective, in order at today's dollars, in order to do that infill, you're looking at about $3,183,000. The 60-year life cycle cost of that is about $4.5 million, so significantly lower than the wooden structure that we discussed a little earlier. as discussed, the water width does allow for more uses. There is a lower cost. The other thing that's important, that if we assume that the current sea level rise modeling continues as predicted, that in 50 years, we're going to have to raise the structure another 0.5 meter, which essentially is just going to be putting more rock and gravel on that current structure to raise it another 3 feet, or sorry, another 1.5 feet. The cons of it, though, is you are going to lose the crib that's there. We may have a solution for that. We'll have to explore, but there's basically a dry dock there that's I think 12 by 12 board or 12 by 12 pieces of lumber that boats can sail over at high tide, sit there on the low tide, do the repairs, and then sail back out again on the next high tide. But we may have an alternate location for that. Many, I say some, but many consider it less visually appealing. And then again, as me previously mentioned, the potential tidal impact has to be investigated. And certainly, it's already been mentioned in the application that as we go down this process, it's approved, and environmental impact assessment will have to be completed on any project that we choose. And this will be the one that likely will get the hardest look at, that will have the most effect on what's going on along the shore there. So the final option we're looking at is a concrete structure with armor stone firewall. So the armor stone continues as is along Market Square and just goes out a little bit and before it turns into a concrete wharf. So as you can see from this aerial view, that the armor stone seawall just goes out a little bit from the shore, that the current structure, and you'll see better in future pics, almost looks exactly like the structure that we have now. Those things that are vertically dropping down from the deck are actually the pillars that are being locked into the ground. Here's an aerial view of the same thing. Again, much more, less space being utilized, but it also more appealing, and it kind of fits into the current structure of the wharf. The side view, you can see that the staircase is still maintained, but you're seeing the type of structure that is being used there. So cement reinforced poles are being put into the ground for the length of that 1/3, but the space is significantly lower. What isn't included in here is that if we're going to put those sacrificial pilings, so those traditional, almost like telephone poles on the outside of the wharf, haven't been included in the quote here. So standing from the middle of the wharf, you can see that it's, again, maintains a very traditional look. With the current wharf even has a concrete top. So from above, it'll look very, very similar. Again, from the corner of King and Water, looks very similar, potentially more visually appealing, but again, no gain space on the wharf. From Market Square, you can see that it's a very low visual impact for any of the visitors and for the tourists and the residents. And the flow of the water, of course, it will continue below that, so less of a environmental impact, I'd assume. This one isn't a lot more expensive, but it's still the most costly at $3.446 million plus HST. But the 60-year life cycle cost, because cement will deteriorate faster than armor stone and harder to replace, is still $5.3 million over the life cycle. And I should have mentioned this earlier, but the life cycle is actually includes all costs, including labor, and includes some of the operating costs that have worked of operating it. So the pros of this potential style is that it resembles traditional style much more. In fact, for most people, they probably couldn't tell the difference. Visually, it transitioned to the pier head much better. Less impact on tidal flow. You do lose the extra width for the walkway. There's $300,000 more in upfront cost, and there's $800,000 more in life cycle cost. And in the life cycle cost, we haven't included any of the financing that'll be on top of that, which should have worked out well for the next one. So from a summary perspective on a capital cost, the wooden structure is 3.4 million. The infill is 3.2, and the concrete structure, the most expensive, is 3.45 million. But what you get into is a life cycle cost, which is extremely important, especially as it affects the tax base and future user costs, is that the wooden structure is almost 50% more than the infill at $6.1 million. The infill is 4.5 million, and the concrete structure is somewhere in between at 5.3 million. The concrete will deteriorate faster and explains what than the infill, and explains the extra cost in doing that. So really, council, at the end of the day, it's really a battle from a business case, at least from the wharf's perspective, a business case. The infill seems to make the most sense and gives the most opportunity for extra type of revenue to be on the wharf. But then you have to feel that against what could come as a cost of lost tourism if the other structure is considered a disaster, or from the locals who may consider that they want to continue with the current structure of the wharf in order to maintain the heritage value that the town so thinks important. So at this point, council, I'll take any questions you have, and certainly can have more information to find. I can incorporate it into our final presentation in a month.
Thank you, Mr. Spear. Council, questions for Mr. Spear or for?
For your worship,
Yeah.
is this not an opportunity for the public to ask questions?
But first, as was outlined by Mr. Knopper, we're giving council just a bit of an opportunity if there's any clarifications you wish to add or questions, and then we will go to the public.
Okay.
May I speak, Mayor?
Yes, certainly, Councilor Bishop.
I would say that the infill with the armor stone would be the best approach because it's more cost effective over the long haul. If people can live with the way it looks, and we still haven't figured out the title implications of doing that. But no matter what it looks like, I'm not really thinking of the visual as much as how long it's going to last and what it's really going to cost the town on the long haul. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bishop.
Worship?
Yes.
Councilor Grew, your worship.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was wondering if the CAO could put up the last slide, which is the comparison between the three options, please, on the screen.
Yep. Well, there you go.
Thank you. I just want to point out for the public's benefit is when I look at these options, we are not comparing apples to apples. The infill option, according to what Mr. Spear presented, is 3 times wider, and it's higher, and it takes into account the effects of climate change, whereas the other 2 options do not do that. And those options would require additional cost to accomplish the same thing as the infill option. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of those differences.
Thank you, Councilor Grew. Anyway, Councilor Harrison, did you have a comment?
More a question. I mean, I don't want to really give comments tonight, so I really want to hear what the public has to say. But one, to follow up on Councilor Grew, is that in fact the case that climate change is taken into that cost? I thought we had to add more rock, which would then take away the width to raise it by another meter or 1.5 feet or whatever it is. Could possibly Chris clarify that?
Sure. So the infill option does include the first 50 years of climate change. And so in 50 years, it would infill. And so you're right, as you infill another 0.5 meter, you're going to lose a little bit on the outside. I can double check to see, have them guesstimate how much that is, but it's not going to be significant because you're only talking 18 inches. So, you know, if any, because they might be able to raise it straight after that instead of doing the pyramid style. But if council likes, I can follow up on that question to see if they, or not, if climate change holds out, are they going to lose any width in 50 years?
And I guess my next question for the other two options, am I then to understand that they're the exact same height as current, or we wouldn't just build in another 1.5 feet now?
So actually, and I didn't explain it really well, the concrete structure has the other half a meter built in early on. So that's already got the first. The wooden structure does not, and the engineers misunderstood me when I asked them, so they couldn't come up with a price really fast to raise that another, but it's going to be a lot more than what you see, the 3.4 million. So that cost will go up additionally, and I can ask them to revisit that before the next, how much the total cost on an equivalent basis is going to be, at least on the height.
And I'm not sure if this is fair, because I don't know if you've looked into this, but do we at all know the cost if we ever had to reverse an infill option, how much it would cost to pull all that stone out?
Well, when are you going to do that, I guess? So long story short, I'm not trying to be hard to get along with. I'm just trying to say inflation, but you're probably talking $200,000 or $300,000 just to remove, and then, you know, then the remaining two options to replace type of thing. But that's a real ballpark by me.
Thanks.
But I guess I'm not
Through your
sure
worship.
what the nature of the question is why we remove it.
So yeah, I was hoping tonight just to hear from the public and not skew opinions or anything like that. But they are big numbers. All of them are big numbers. There is a few letters that we received that indicated you have other priorities. There's other things you should be spending money on. I think it's important to note that not doing anything is not an option for the town of St. Andrews. You know, we're only a few years away from, literally a couple of years away from not allowing vehicles to use the wharf due to engineer reports, and potentially it could lead to closing it. So the next council, whether it be this or the next council, is going to have to do something here. So it's important for the public to know that this isn't an optional project that we're going through. They are huge numbers, and I certainly take them very seriously, because it's a lot of money for a small community. But just when we're looking at these numbers, it's important to note that over 60 years, $1.6 million works out to be just over $26,000 per year. And if we're able to get some government funding like we did for this project, hopefully in the future, and contribute 30% of that works out to be about $8,000 for municipality per year. So although it's a big number, there's a lot of what ifs there. We should really look at the options, weigh out the cost, but also weigh out the cost if we are to make a significant change to the historic feel of our downtown. So I'm not saying either way. I'm just saying that it's money versus the risk of what it would look like. And that's what I think the public's going to have to weigh out today.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Anyone else wish to comment or have a question from council? If not, I will move through Mr. Knopper to begin to take questions from those who have tuned in to us tonight and wish to comment.
Thank you, Your Worship. As stated before, to anybody in the public or on Facebook, if you wish to participate tonight in discussions, you have a couple of options. You can join the Zoom discussion. You'll be given a limited time to speak to council. Based on the number we have here, I think we will keep the comments to about 3 minutes at this point. As well, you do have the option to email me, pnopper@townofstandrews.ca, or after this meeting, you can still submit written comments that will be provided to council, and we will still be having a second meeting, public consultation on February 17th. So there is still plenty of time to submit your comments and questions. So if you don't have one tonight, feel free to provide them at a later date. So at this time, I'm going to go to our first speaker, and I'm going to ask Mr. Fiander, you have the floor to council. You have 3 minutes to provide comments or questions on tonight's discussion.
Thank you. I guess my first question would be, is this information available as in PDF format or some form so that we can look at this in more detail later?
If council's okay with releasing the presentation to the public, I can, yeah, sorry. If the council's all right with releasing the slideshow to the public, we can prepare it to be put on the website tomorrow.
Through your worship, I would support that. It's a public document that we want as many eyes on it as possible.
And I would.
I don't see that as being any problem unless anyone else on council does. I can't imagine it. This is the purpose of a public consultation, so people can see what we have in front of us. Great. Thank you,
Mr.
Fiander.
Fiander?
Do you have any other comment?
Thank you. No, I will provide something before the February 17th meeting, but I'd like to look at it in more detail first. One general comment, I guess, in terms of the physical appearance, the aesthetic impact of the rock armorstone thing is massive and contradictory to the character of the entire downtown waterfront area. The concrete option alleviates all of that. It blends in much better and focuses on Market Square rather than widening out half the approach on the wharf, which I don't understand the rationale for in any event. Maybe there's some good explanation for that, but the cross-section width of the lanes and the shoulders on the armor option is something like a Trans-Canada Highway option, and it runs out to a wharf approach that's a dead end, and the other half of the approach to the wharf is only 22 feet wide or so, 22, 23 feet wide. So the justification for all of that extra width and all the cost that goes with it, quite aside from the negative visual impact, is hard to understand. That's all I have at this point in time.
Thank you, Mr. Fiander.
I will now go to Ms. Joanne Carney. Ms. Joanne Carney, you have the floor to council. Please provide your question or comment. Your 3 minutes starts now.
I do think it's important, as Brad Henderson said, to secure the longevity of the wharf. I do support the longevity and the cheaper aspect of the infill, the rock infill. There may be a way to improve the historic feel, such as use of red granite rather than the gray granite. And if we could get a cost analysis on that. I think if we had made it more of a boardwalk type feel and use some of those environmental boards and make it a boardwalk on the right side rather than all pavement on the top, then it'll give it a more of a historic feel with the boardwalk and also with the ticket booths that are in cedar shake and match the town. And if we could get a drawing rendering of that may help ease the pain of the look of the rocks. I would be interested to see what the cost of the increased on the concrete wharf, if it was going to go for concrete for look, if we could maintain the width, and what the increased cost on that might be. That would be a consideration if it's found, if the rocks fail the tidal environmental assessment, then we'll automatically have to revert to concrete. So it may be good to have a cost assessment on the increased width for the options for tourism plus the narrow width. With the better walkway, and you can add benches all along the way, it gives a real park-like feel for the whole wharf, and it doesn't feel so industrial. I support bringing the breakwater rocks all the way down to the corner, not stopping at the ticket offices on the left-hand side. So it would match equally on both sides. It'd be symmetrical. The breakwater would go all the way to the corner, just like it does towards the cottage craft. So if we could get a cost analysis on that for the breakwater to protect the shoreline all the way to the corner, over towards where the lemonade is.
Ms. Carney, you have 1 minute.
Okay. And I will be interested to see what the environmental impact is on the tides and that area. So I don't know how quickly that can be done.
Ticket offices, I'd like to
And-
consider the renderings and the cost analysis. How much money could they bring in? Over
So
60
there's
years?
also an element of the cost analysis offsetting the cost with those ticket booths on the wharf. So you
We'd
may
like a ticket.
you may want to work that in of how that may improve some of the wharf revenue. And that's it.
Thank you, Ms. Carney.
Thank you.
Your worship, I'll go to the next person. I am going to J. Edward Hurley. Mr. Hurley, you have the floor to council if you have a question or comment.
Yeah, hi, folks. I guess I put my questions in the chat feature here. I'll just read what I had written down. The first thing that came to mind was to clarify the key objective here. Is it to replace an aging wharf as the first priority and attempt to accommodate climate change induced model scenarios? Or are we replacing the wharf with a priority view to accommodating the change in model tidal change? There is a difference in the approach in that. And just as a follow-up, to what extent does any of these options, which it may have been stated, but I missed it. If so, I'm sorry for that. But do any of these options include the needed elevational difference for anticipated extreme high tides modeled in the near future? You can tell from my questioning, they're really coming about rather than just replacing a wharf. To what extent are we accommodating change due to climate? That's it. Thank you.
Would you like me to answer that, your worship?
Yeah, certainly, Mr. Spear, if you can.
Mr. Hurley, thank you for your questions. It's kind of a chicken and egg scenario to a certain extent, but when we're looking at replacing the wharf, one of the, again, because the original wooden structure has some structural issues that have to be addressed, the source of funding through Infrastructure Canada is actually on a Green Initiative Fund. And in order to do that, one of the key elements of that is you have to address sea level rise and climate change as part of this infrastructure. So by default, it has become one of the primary purposes that if we don't incorporate something like that into the design, that the funding will be rejected. As far as the future tidal impacts, according to the recent data that we have, the 0.53 of a meter is considered good for the next 50 years. In 50 years, assuming the current models hold, then another element will have to take place. Again, the infill feature is a lot easier just to bring in more material to raise it up. Or if you go with the other two structures, you're probably going to have to do a complete redesign to raise it from below. And so anything's possible through engineering and design. At this point, it seems the infill feature is the most economically feasible to address further changes in the weather. And if it gets worse, then the higher it can go, much easier.
Thank you, Mr. Spear.
Your worship, I'll go to the next Zoom. I'm going to go to Mr. Miller. Mr. Vic Miller, you have any questions or comments for council? You have the floor. Your time starts now.
How long, if you do any of these, how long does it take to do them? I mean, will the wharf be shut down like just over the winter time, or will it be shut down for a couple of years to do these options here?
Again,
The plan is, Mr. Miller,
Spear?
that the work would, oh, go ahead. Sorry, your worship. You want me to go? The plan
Yes.
would be, Mr. Miller, just to be the construction would only take place in the winter, that it wouldn't interfere with the seasonal use of the facility. Although aquaculture and the commercial fishery would be displaced over a couple of winters.
But the wharf would still be open during the summertime during the construction period?
Yes, so the phases would be completed over the winter, so it'd be fully operational once the summer starts.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Miller, do you have any other questions or comments?
No, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Your worship, I'll go to the next caller. I have a TC, and I apologize, Awibi, if I'm saying your name wrong, I apologize. You do have the floor to council. You may ask your questions or comments now. Give him 1 second. The floor is yours.
Hi, yes. I was just going to add a third thing to maybe the reason with the wharf is also just making it even more useful for the tourists in that area to enjoy the water. So thinking about how it can be developed a bit more down there to like what Joanne was saying with more seating and picnic area and just ways for them to access that area. I think that's another aspect of this as well that could be considered. Thank you. The other comments I'm great with too.
Thank you.
Your worship, I'll go to the next one. Miss Lisa Eldridge, you have the floor to council if you wish to ask your question or comment now. Just give them a minute to unmute. I will come back to Miss Eldridge. I will go to Miss Shannon May Pringle. Miss Pringle, you have the floor to council if you would like to ask any questions or provide comment. Seeing no action, council, I'll move on. Miss Lillian Mitchell, you have the floor to council if you wish to ask any questions or comments on tonight's meeting.
I don't have any questions or comments at this time, but thank you.
Ms. Mitchell. I will go to our last caller on Zoom. I'll ask Steve. You have the floor to council. If you'd like to ask any questions or comments, the floor is yours.
I don't have any questions at this time. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much. At this time, your worship, I will go to the email questions. I do have a set of them, so please bear with me. The first question comes from, question and or comment comes from Joe Harrison. Just give me a second to load, and I will read it out. Says, hi, Paul. As the rock jetties have not been built for many years along the U.S. East Coast because of adverse outcomes with respect to tidal flows causing shallowing and navigation problems, a rock jetty in Leonardville that has been problematic in this way too. Before a decision is made to proceed with the rock jetty, will a formal assessment be done by an engineered firm with coastal, sorry, give me a second, I'm just getting emails all over here, with coastal engineering experience to assess the effect of a tidal flow causing silt and erosion? This is important because of the cost involved in dredging the harbor over the proposed 60 years could be significant. The last dredging cost about $250,000 for only a portion of the dock area. This may need to be done soon again. If a change in tidal flow causes increased silt, the need to dredge will increase. Even every 10 years, this would add to a cost of approximately $1.5 million. Will the coastal engineering study be undertaken? Signed, Joe Harrison. Council, would you like to respond?
If I might, I'd like to respond to that. My understanding of the tentative approval that we got for this project for funding from the federal government absolutely includes that kind of an assessment that would have to be done on any approach that we put forward as a final approach, whether it be the initial one with the rock or the others. We'll all have to have that kind of an environmental assessment, because as Mr. Spear outlined earlier in his presentation, this funding is being offered to us tentatively under an environmental green stream of the infrastructure program. So that's the top priority. I think that addresses one of the previous comments that was made about, why are we doing this? Well, we're doing it to make sure that the wharf withstands the future and it will be of use to us in terms of our economy in our town. But we're also doing it to combat climate change issues that we have already identified in our previous assessments of things like storm surge and sea level rise. And therefore, whatever we put forward has to pass muster environmentally before we're going to have a chance of getting this money, which amounts to whatever we come up with, 70% of the cost that will be paid for, as I understand it, by the federal government, but probably will not be given unless we have that kind of an assessment.
Sorry, Your Worship, can I correct something with you?
Certainly.
Everything you said was right, except that there is an upper limit on how much they are willing to give us based on an application that was submitted a couple of years ago. So we aren't going to get, if we had a $10 million option that we wanted to go with, we aren't going to get $7 million from them. I believe that the upper contribution is around $3.5 million, no matter what way we go. And just so the people know too, is that this work that we're doing on the approach isn't the total work that's needed on the wharf. There's also a lot of work that needs to be done on the other end of the wharf, the pier heads and things. And so this is only a component of the total project that we're talking about tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Spear.
Your Worship, I'll go to my next email. This one came from Cindy Kohler. Apologies. As it states, this presentation was incredibly biased. Just because it is less expensive does not mean it is better. Did the town consider the tourism value? Have other options for wooden structures been considered? Wood technology has come a long way. Armor stone is a safety concern as well. Has that been considered as well? Council, would you like to respond to that?
Do we need to respond, Paul, or is this more us right now taking in input?
Through your worship, you have the option of both. So we can take input and respond back later through the other presentations if there's questions that council doesn't have an answer or would like to wait on answering.
Thank you, Mr. Knopper. I think we'll wait on that particular one because we just don't have an answer at this point in time.
All right, Your Worship, I'll go to my next email. This one came from Vicky and Katie McDonald. They have two questions. The first question is, are the business operators, whale watchers, and fishermen who use the wharf being consulted in the process on how each option might affect their operations? And number two, in regards to buildings that would need to be removed or need to be moved at the entrance of the wharf in Market Square, how would that work for the business owners? Thank you.
I think I can respond to that unless you, Mr. Spear, would you like to respond?
It's up to you, Your Worship. I sat on the silence for a minute before. If you'd like me to talk about it, I can, but if you'd like to continue, I'll mute myself off too.
No, go ahead,
Well,
Mr.
I can
Spear.
start. In regards to the business owners, I guess in most public consultation, we generally not try to go to very specific groups, but we've been advertising this significantly, and so we're hoping they'll reach out. I see that there's at least 2 or 3 of the tour boat operators here right now. I have been in discussions with the person whose building may move. They're aware of that is out there. Regardless of what happens, whatever option, that building's going to have to be moved out of the way to repair Market Wharf. But again, it's going to be, Market Square. So it'll be out of the way over the winter. But certainly people can reach out from other businesses and stuff and let us know how they feel, as this public process is the first step in it.
Your Worship, I'll continue with the next questions if you're okay.
Yes.
Okay. The next question came from Jimmy Craig, and a question comment said, shouldn't the wharf have to fit with the historic main core of the town? Is anyone else with a building, if anyone else was building anything, they would have to be held to that. I don't think a less appealing option should even be considered. Your worship, I'll continue. Next question came from Vicky Hogarth and was wondering if there are other communities that have recently updated their wharves that we could look at for inspiration for designs, and if so, which towns' wharves were they?
I'll comment on that. I think
If
that's something that we might want to look at, but we have, I think, within the context of New Brunswick, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Spear, you might comment on this too. There are only 2 non-federally owned wharves, you know, of the nature of ours in the entire province. Ours and one in Pointe du Chêne near Shediac that is actually run by a nonprofit organization. This is pretty much the only municipally owned and operated wharf in New Brunswick. And much of the federal wharves that are being built have been built with rock and concrete, I believe. Mr. Spear, am I close to the mark there, or am I way off?
No, you're dead on, your worship. And in fact, down in Black's Harbor, but again, it's a whole different environment, but they expanded the wharf down there, and it was the similar type of infill construction as we see here. As opposed to going straight out in the water, they just brought the whole shore out that way.
But it's a valuable comment, and we will look at that. You know, we have looked at, and we will look at other options. And I guess I will go back to the question about, you know, improvements in wood construction. You know, if we could find a wooden wharf that would last for 60 years with less, you know, lifetime costs to maintain it, we'd probably be interested.
Your worship, I'll continue.
Yep.
The next,
if I may, worship, just
go ahead, Chris.
Just don't forget, that staff didn't come up with these figures on our own. That CBCL Inc., a consultant from the city who does a lot of wharfs, was consultant in all these and provided 90% of the information here. So we will ask them the question, but we'd have to assume that in their best judgment, they're providing that type of material anyway.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Spear. That's a valid point. That this was all based on engineering advice that we received.
Your worship, I'll continue. The next comment is from Katie McDonald. The question is, could Chris elaborate on what would need to take place to find out what the effects of option 2 would be on the environment and any impacts for the bay? And will this study be done soon?
The quick answer is this: we're going to have to see what council goes. These environmental impact assessment studies can be anywhere between $75,000 to $200,000. And so we weren't going to initiate it until at least we saw if council had an interest in doing it. Also, these studies will be financed through the capital program that we're going granting for. So if they offer this, they'll give us the funds for this. So I guess until we hear from that, so the first step really is to see if council will even continue with this design. If not, then it becomes a moot point. But if they are, then the next question, then that would be one of the very first things that the funding partners would look for, would be an EIA. But I suspect we wouldn't even start that till the spring, and probably not available to the summer or fall as they do their studies. But again, we haven't had the discussions until we've.
Your worship, your
I
worship,
think
you had a
that
question.
I think that Mr. Spear raises a pretty valid point there in that there may be people online that are saying, why don't we just do an environmental study for each of these options? And Mr. Spear just touched on the answer, is that these studies are very expensive and they can cost between $75,000 and $200,000. And it would be cost prohibitive to try and do a study on all three options. So we're sort of, the environmental study is part of the process, I think, of going through the project. So we want to try and do it right the first time and get as much input as we can beforehand.
I think just to ask this, Chris, it's about this issue. Will we be doing, even if the government doesn't need the type of study that figures out about tidal flows and that? Because I don't think they need a broad-based study, do they? Like, will we do that type of study ourselves, even if it's not required by our federal funding partner? Because I know from comments from people in the past, there's been smell issues and other issues with seaweed all getting hung up on like when it was more of a barrier there. And I don't think we can just say, oh, only if the feds want it, because we may not be that big a project in their eyes. So I think we have to commit to the public that we're going to do an environmental ESA regardless of whether it's needed or not. So I think we got to factor that in.
Yeah, and again, it's what I agree 100% that what the funding partners may require, what council thinks in its own best interest could be two different things. But certainly when it comes to that, we'll, once we find out what the federal partners want, we can come back to council and see if you want to expand it further than what they're.
Thank you.
Your worship, I'll continue to the next one.
Yes.
Your worship, the next one comes from Siobhan Neal, and it's a comment and question. It says, I strongly feel that maintaining the cultural heritage look and feel of the town is vastly more important than whatever benefit you think you'll gain from having a wider wharf. I am happy to see that you've also explored a concrete option to maintain the look and feel. I believe that there is more inherent value in maintaining the cultural heritage of the town compared to the minimal differences in life cycle costs for the concrete or wooden options. Is council aware that the DFO is rebuilding a large timber wharf at the biological station? And they are raising it in response to climate change, which is what I thought the goal of this project was. And in terms of the three options, the infill option seems to have a greater environmental impact as well as cultural heritage impact than the other two. That's a significant difference that will become evident in an environmental assessment.
Okay, thank you.
Your worship, I'll continue. The next question, comments comes from Kaylin Maurer. So some questions and comments to share. The first one was, will the EIE be completed or even begun partially on the infill option before the second public consultation? I know that's a rock jetty like that which is being proposed has the potential to drastically change currents and the ecology of the area. And so I find it difficult to understand how we could make a decision without that information being accessible. Does the infill option have rocks underneath the entire structure? Would it allow for people to walk underneath the wharf at low tide? That is something that I know some tourists would like to experience when they come to town. Has council considered a hybrid option, which might include wood to enhance the look, but not the structure? Would this be possible with the concrete and or the infill options? And the final one is, I see that the boat ramp is gone. It is probably important to include an accessible option to allow beach access for people who don't do well with stairs.
Okay, good comments. That's my comment. We can't answer. I think I can say, Mr. Spear, without deferring to you, that there'll be no assessment done between now and February the 17th.
Through your worship, I'll continue.
That's correct, your worship.
Through your worship, the next question comes from Joe Harrison, is what is the option for the dry dock that Chris alluded to?
Mr. Spear, can you answer that?
Yeah, and again, Mr. Harrison, we were just talking about it among staff and we haven't done a big deep delve into it, but long story short is we'd put it on the other side of the wharf beyond, if the breakwater was the option, we'd put it so that'd be closer down to the wharf shack. That's already fairly shallow water anyway. You can still sail a boat into it. And at low tide, it gets pretty low there. You'd be dried out fairly quick, but that was just an internal discussion. We haven't really had a hard look at it to decide if that's a real good option or not.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Spear.
Your worship, I have 2 comments or questions from people on Zoom. I am done with the emails at this point. Do you have an issue if I return to the Zoom and have the 2 people speak?
Oh, that's fine, Mr. Knopper.
Okay. I will open the floor up to Pat Fitzgerald. You have the floor to council. Your 3 minutes starts now.
Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay. No, my only question was, or several questions. Has anyone considered with the infill option, the loss of the wharf face? I mean, the wharf is being used to ground up boats against, and it's also used at high water to load and unload vessels, mainly commercial fishing vessels, salmon aquaculture vessels. To me, that I'm speaking for the huntsman here, not only myself, we use that portion of the wharf several times a year, as do other boat users. The farther out from the bank to ground the boat out, the less time we would have to use it. The only other thing too is the aesthetics of the infill option. Armor stone is a way of life. You have to protect your bank, but to put armor stone way out from the bank onto the mud flat, it begins to look like a rock pit. I find the aesthetics bad. I'm concerned about the usability of the wharf. Those are my major comments, but I'm really concerned about the loss of the wharf face and the aesthetics. And the armor stone is just a poor option. It looks like a breakwater in some industrial port. It's I don't think it's in keeping with what the town really wants or needs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your worship, I've got one more question, comment. I'm going to go to Lillian Mitchell. Lillian, you do have the floor to council.
Yes, thank you. My question is about whether or not there are different timelines under consideration for the construction period of each option. I guess I'm curious as to whether one is perhaps quite a bit longer. And you've referred to the construction happening in the winter months, but I was wondering if you might just be a bit more specific. Thank you.
Mr. Spear, would you like to tackle that one?
Sure, Your Worship. So the winter months, what I'm talking about would be from the end of, so after Halloween till probably the 1st of May, early May, when the tour boat operators and pleasure boats start going again. That's been put to the engineers if this work could be done in stages during that time period, and they're saying absolutely. I haven't asked the hard question of how long will it take to complete the project. We're just talking in general terms, 2 to 3 seasons, but I can certainly go back to them to see. Although, this is a huge project for St. Andrews. It's a relatively still a small infrastructure project for most construction companies that'll do it. So I don't see that being a big issue, but I'll certainly double check and make sure that I understand the timelines properly.
Your worship. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Mitchell.
Would I be allowed to ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, you still have time.
Okay. I'm just wondering if there's, and I know this is difficult, but has there been any consideration given to, like, what if there are delays to the timeline of when the wharf is unusable? I know that's kind of difficult to plan for the unplanned, but has any thought been given to if the timeline was like perhaps extended and kind of, I guess I'm just considering the users of the wharf and what a longer closure period, what kind of impact that would have. Thank you.
I might tackle that one if you don't mind. I think absolutely. I think you're referring to what if it's May and they're not finished and it drags on into June and July. I just think we can't let that happen because our wharf is a commercial hub for the town of St. Andrews, and we couldn't put the business owners that operate from there in that kind of jeopardy. So whatever we would do in terms of issuing contracts, we would have to make sure that you are in October and out in May as we've advertised, so that we don't impact the economic benefits of the wharf.
Your worship, there is one person who joined just now. If you're good, I will allow them to have their question and comment. Observer 001, please state your full name and you have 3 minutes to provide your question or comment to council. And I guess observer 1 left. So your worship, that's all the comments, questions from everyone on Zoom and through my email system at this point. And again, I will refer to the public. We will be having another meeting on the 17th of February. Comments can still come in via writing to the town, to town hall, or to my email, pnopper@townofstandrews.ca. Council, your worship, it looks like council has a couple of questions.
Okay.
Just a quick question, if I could. And
yes,
don't shoot me for asking this, Paul, but can we preserve the comments on the Facebook feed? And I know we're trying not to do that in the future, but either that or we should just shut them off maybe so people don't put them there and they were forced to email them. But there is quite a good not even back and forth. There's a lot of comments on there. It seems pretty civil. And because I wouldn't mind a copy of all these emails and that after, just so we have a feel for it. And I don't even know if you can print that out, what's under the feed, but if you can, it may be useful.
Your worship, I'll answer, if you don't mind, I'll answer that. I will prepare a report for council with all of the information that was provided tonight, so that council will have all the comments, both from the Facebook site as requested, from Zoom, and any emails that were presented tonight will be provided in a report to council.
Perfect, thank you.
Your worship, just a quick one is, I know when Mr. Nopper was doing the roll call, Lisa Eldridge and Shannon May did not respond. Is it possible to try them one more time just to see if they do have any comments?
Yeah, good suggestion, Councillor Groom. Mr. Nopper, can we do that?
Your worship, no problem. I will go back to Miss Eldridge. Miss Eldridge, the floor is yours to council. Do you have a question or comment about the wharf? We can hear you, Miss Eldridge. She's gone back. Miss Eldridge, are you good? Your worship, I'm not hearing any, I'm hearing audio, but nothing coming through. So I will just put Miss Eldridge on mute, and Miss Shannon May will send in an email to council. Miss Eldridge, do you have a comment?
Can she email as well?
Anybody can email. Okay. My email is out there to the public. Any comments, questions come from there. Miss Eldridge doesn't have one right now. She will be in touch. So your worship, at this point, those are the comments that we have.
All right. Look, I just have one final comment. Having chaired this meeting, I really want to express my appreciation for all of those people who listened in, called in, gave us comments. I think there were some excellent points made, some things that I certainly hadn't encountered before. Thus, the benefit of having a public consultation and the benefit of having another one on February the 17th. So I just wanted to thank everyone for their thoughtful comments this evening and questions. I'll look for a motion to adjourn the meeting from someone.
So move.
Thank you, Councillor Akaji. And a seconder?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Councillor Bishop. All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned, and thank you, Councillor, for your attention this evening.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks for everything, Paul and Chris. It was